All right, everybody, welcome. And thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your Wednesday night to join us on this important conversation, or important start to a conversation, and engaging with our kids in some of these mental health issues that are starting to pop up, are starting to be exacerbated because of what we've just walked through. So I'm really excited to have Jessica with us. Jessica, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, my name is Jessica Hutchison. I am a licensed clinical therapist in the Barrington area. I specialize in sudden traumatic loss, and really have been a big proponent for talking about mental health throughout what has been a very big loss for many of our children.
In this whole conversation started because Jessica reached out to my office as a constituent over a concern that she had or an issue she had. And through that conversation, found out what she did and said, more people got to know about this. More people have to hear this great tools and resources that you're going to be presenting with us tonight. And as a parent, this is vitally important. And so I knew we had to figure something out. And then I was blown away too when we had first talked about how this time of year is actually the heightened point of when these conversations need to happen. You know, I always thought I've got the seasonal affective disorder, trying to figure out how my insurance can write me a prescription to go to a beach has not worked out. I think there'd be a lot of people happy if we could figure that out. But you were saying coming out of the winter into this springtime, when so many people go back to feeling normal, when then those who don't, this is heavy and hard.
Yes, exactly. And that's something we do often see in the springtime is all of a sudden you realize as people start moving forward that you yourself are feeling differently than everybody else. And so what I have kind of talked about with the past 2 years is we're looking at the longest winter of all time, right? Where we have all been very isolated for a tremendous amount of time. And what happens when we start opening those doors, taking off masks and going out into the world? What are we going to see?
Yeah, so this conversation tonight isn't about COVID. It's not about different mitigations, what didn't work, what was or wasn't effective. We're acknowledging the fact that we had 2 unprecedented years, and especially as school administrators, as parents, now what? And so as we're coming out, just like we came out of winter, there's kids that are coming out and everything appears to be just fine. There's plenty that maybe on the surface appears to be fine, but deep down isn't. So tonight is an opportunity for us to learn, for us as parents to take some notes and how to engage with our kids in these conversations. So I'm really excited about that. She's going to dive deep, give us some great tools and resources. And if you have questions, there is a Q&A button. If you press that, and when we're done with the presentation here, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can with that. So with that, Jessica, take it away. We'll start the presentation.
Okay. All right, perfect. So like I said, today we're going to really be diving into how to start conversations and the importance of starting conversations. And I do want to add that so much of this is obviously from my own professional experience, but also as a parent and mother myself of 2 young children in navigating these conversations. So a couple things I want to start with in definitions that I am very much think we need to get comfortable with as a society and as a whole. The first one is trauma. It has been a word that has had different meaning to everybody. And it's one that we really need to start having an everyday conversation. The next term is adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs. You may have heard about ACEs scores. It's a factor we use in the mental health field, but these 2 definitions. So we're going to start with kind of breaking down what trauma is. So trauma, what we think it is versus what it actually is. So I want to start by saying this is probably one of the best definitions of trauma that I've ever seen. And it says any negative life event that occurs in a state of relative helplessness, right? So key word right there is helplessness. Most adults that I have worked with cannot pinpoint one or even multiple moments that completely or have broke their life apart. Trauma is a part of life. It is unavoidable. Before you skip, I want to go through a couple things. So one of the reasons I want to say that trauma is a part of life and we have to start entering the word trauma into our conversations is because it's unavoidable. It doesn't matter who we are, what our background is. We all as human beings have experienced some element of trauma because we have felt helpless within our lives. So in my clinical practice, I often give an attachment questionnaire to people that I work with and have them kind of dive into their past. And when it gets to the trauma question, so many people will say, no, I haven't had trauma. No, I haven't had trauma. Nope, nothing bad has ever happened to me. And then when we start really breaking it down, what I have found is so many people assume that if their life has been good and they have had a number of resources, then they themselves have not experienced trauma. And so today I want to shift how we're looking at trauma to kind of bring down the intensity of the word to really be able to talk with our kids to identify if they themselves have experienced this type of trauma. Adverse childhood experiences. Okay, so what are they? The great thing about adverse childhood experiences is that it gave us a framework to really look at how do difficult experiences, so events that occur in childhood between 0 and 17 that undermine a child's sense of safety, stability, and bonding. So this framework really gave us a good opportunity to study how adverse childhood experiences can negatively impact a child as they get older, up through adulthood. Why do we care, right? Why in the heck would we care? There is significant data that demonstrates a very strong connection between ACEs, so the higher ACEs score, and a vast number of negative health problems. Now, we're not talking about just mental health here. We're talking about heart disease. We're talking about cognitive problems. We're talking about cellular aging, higher risk of suicide, and cancer. There is a direct correlation between the amount of adverse childhood experiences that one experiences during those formative years and how it impacts them later in life, both physically and mentally. So with ACEs, here's one thing that I have personally looked at with ACEs is that a lot of the events that they talk about are direct. And now what many of us in the mental health field are looking at and researchers are saying, well, what about all of these indirect events that are occurring? So when I say indirect, I'm talking about 24-hour news cycles that are on, or social media and what is read. How about pictures and images that children will see? I've heard that in my office all the time about not only did I hear about this awful thing, but I actually saw a video on social media of this event happening. So these indirect events that are occurring, it can be society as a whole. It can be within our schools, it can be anywhere, and just really absorbing that. And what we do know from research is that you don't necessarily have to experience the event to have a trauma response to it. So it's really important, trauma, and then just these adverse childhood experiences. So let's just look at the past 2 years, right? So every single child, this is one thing that it truly builds a lot of connection throughout the entire country, is that every single child in the United States has suffered or experienced a hidden or everyday trauma, like leaving school and not returning. I will never forget picking up my daughter on March 13th of 2020. I will never forget that moment. And actually being consumed with an overwhelming amount of anxiety about what I was going to do with her for an extra week, because I thought spring break was going to be 2 weeks instead of 1. thank goodness I didn't know what was coming, because I myself don't know how I would have coped with that. But they left laughing and thinking they were coming back in 2 weeks. And then they didn't return. Then they did come back to school, but they were being asked not to maintain distance from one another, right? We have to keep each other safe. So we're just going to be, we don't touch, stay apart. And then just being masked, right? It's different. It's something very different than they experienced. And these are just a few of the many things that happened in 2 years. But what I have talked about is that March 13th, well, for me, March 13th was the day that everything in their world changed. The world became a lot less safe than it was on March 12th. All of a sudden, they experienced and were now made aware that bad things can happen, and bad things can potentially happen to them or somebody that they love. And that can be a really hard thing to work through depending on developmental age. So it's really looking at how have our children's whole worldview changed throughout these past 2 years. Also, their daily life, completely uncertain. We did not know what the next day was going to bring. Were they going to go back to school? Was it going to be remote? Would it be, it was completely uncertain. We switched directions so many times. And the younger the child, the more that child needs structure. We thrive as human beings in a world that is predictable and consistent. And for 2 years, we lost all of that. There was no predictability and there was no consistency. There was no control. We all lost a lot of control, and so did our children. They lost one area in their lives, a structure, their schools that were very much a consistent. What is resiliency? So I'll be honest, one thing that drove me a little bonkers during the past 2 years was continually hearing the statement, children are resilient, children are resilient, children are resilient. By far the most discredited statement that we have, because children are not born resilient. We teach them resiliency. We model resiliency. We help them become resilient. So this whole idea that children are resilient, they'll be fine, actually can lead to a lot of difficulties down the road if they're not able to process certain events. So resilience, this is a really important one too, that I think parents need to hear, is that resilience isn't built by blocking the icky things that we don't like to talk about in our society. It's not about blocking fear. It's not about blocking disappointment or sadness or grief. We, as a society as a whole, are really terrible with emotions outside of happiness, joy, and the good ones, right? The minute somebody starts crying, I watch it all the time. Somebody starts crying, and the first thing somebody does is, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, please don't cry. Crying is a normal human thing to do. It's an expression. And so we like to bring that down, mostly because as a mom, I don't mind people crying in my office, but as a mom, it hurts me to see my child hurt, right? So the first thing I want to do is try to make it better for them. But in that instance, is making it better for them about me and making me feel better, or is it about them? What am I teaching them? Resiliency is about giving them a safe base to return when they experience things, right? So resiliency is about saying, go do the things, right? And you can always come back here. I have faith and I trust you as a human, and I will always be here if you need me. Guiding our children through difficult experiences builds self-trust. One of the biggest pieces of resiliency is about trusting oneself, right? So we talk about that gut feeling we get when we just know something's off, or just having confidence, right? Like, I'm really scared to go talk to this person over here, but I'm going to go do it, because if it doesn't work out, then I can go over here and talk to mom or dad or grandma or about that experience of feeling rejected. Trust in oneself and knowing you have a safe base to build or to return to is what builds resiliency. So again, it's not about, I hear it all the time about, I just want to create this happy childhood for my children, and I just want them to experience so much joy. Great, awesome. But they have to experience the icky stuff too, because the icky stuff is such a part of life. Life is never just the good. One of my favorite quotes that I like to use in my office is, "This too shall pass," is for the bad times, but it's also for the good times. So when I have people come in my office, or even my children that are saying, "Oh my gosh, this is so great, I don't want it to end," it's also okay to say, "But it is. It will end. So we enjoy it, because this too shall pass." Why we need to let our kids fall. And it's, if anybody has young kids, or when your children were little, remember when they started to walk and they'd kind of teeter and wobble, and you just knew they were going to fall, but we let them. A lot of times, unless it was really dangerous, we let them stumble, we let them fall, right? Because that's how they learned. As they get older, we have a lot harder of a time letting them stumble and letting them fall. When we don't, though, they can't build self-trust, because self-trust and trust in ourselves is built through natural consequences, right? So if I didn't study for a big test in college and then failed, well, then I learned the consequences of choosing to go have fun over studying, right? That's a natural, consequence. Role of a parent. I feel like I do a good amount of coaching with parents in my office sometimes, and what our role is, right? And so much of our role as a parent is to guide, not to do for, right? It's, if you have young kids and you know how frustrating it can be to let them put on their own shoes when you're in a really big hurry so you can get out the door. Oh my gosh, drives me crazy, right? But that if we do it for them, they don't learn, right? So we have to usually manage our own frustrations, anxieties, and nerves in order for them to learn. We do that through modeling healthy boundaries. I am still working on that one. Saying yes to everything and then being really overwhelmed, and your kids experience it, right? So what are we modeling for our kids? Allowing the child to exist as they are within, I would like to say, within reason, right? So I was told growing up all the time that I was too sensitive. You're too sensitive. Oh, stop it. You're too sensitive, right? And what that taught me as a child is to bury my emotions, right? Don't show them, because sensitivity is a bad thing. And so when I talk about allowing our children to exist as they are, I'm really talking about honoring how they express themselves and how they show up. Observe and act from a state of awareness and wisdom rather than doing it for them. Again, that awareness of, we know, right? My daughter's so fearless, which is so hard sometimes, but she will go up to the large group of girls in the park that I know are just going to tell her to go away because she's younger, right? But allowing her to do that, and even suggesting, I don't know, they kind of look like they're doing their thing, suggesting, right? Offering little words of advice or wisdom, but then allowing her to go make that choice. Guides. Parents as guides have faith in the foundation, and they trust that the child can weather what life can bring. Children oh, they're so much smarter than we give them credit for. But when we don't let our kids stumble, when we don't let them fall every once in a while, a lot of times they think it's because we don't think they can. And that's a really big one, is knowing that we learn as children that when our parents let us do things, it's because they have faith and they trust us. This is a really difficult one for, I think, my generation of parents, raised by a baby boomers, right? Who were raised by World War II vets. I mean, you want to talk about burying emotions. There were no emotions. Very, very common phrase was, don't hang your dirty clothes out to dry, right? So it is hard as parents to model something or model a behavior that we ourselves maybe didn't learn. And I want to just point that out, is because a lot of us are learning along the way, and can really be tough on ourselves when we don't get it right. And I'll tell you, I don't get it right a lot. And that's okay, right? It's about being able to say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to go learn how. When we talk about kids falling, I think one of the best stories is if we look at Michael Jordan, right? And my daughter has this quote on her wall that she got from my husband that talks about Michael Jordan and how many times he failed. And I often wonder, and maybe it's in an interview somewhere, but if he would have ever become the greatest basketball player of all time if his parents didn't let him fail, because he failed and he failed and he failed. And I often think about when he didn't make the basketball team, what if his parents would have told him, maybe you should try something else, right? So there's so many examples of how failure can really lead to so many great things in this world. So I'm going to move to coping, some of coping skills, right? So I think these are two words that are probably fairly known, adaptive and maladaptive, but I want to kind of revisit them a little bit. Adaptive coping skills and how we can look at how our kids cope, right? And how we can assess how are our kids doing. So adaptive coping skills, keywords here are action. It's an action we take to help us return to feelings of safety, right? So we are actively doing something to help bring us back or to calm ourselves down, right? I just need to go outside and take a walk. I need to breathe some fresh air. I need to call my friend, right? That is an action we are taking. The key here is that it requires effort and a conscious acknowledgement of the discomfort. That is a key. So an action, right? I'm actively doing something and I'm associating it with something else. So I am going to go take a walk outside because I am feeling very overwhelmed right now and need to go breathe. That would be an example of an adaptive coping skill. Maladaptive, we often go straight to drugs and alcohol or risky type behaviors, but it's actually so much more than that. And I really think if we reframe how we're looking at maladaptive coping skills, it could change the outcome. I could potentially not have a job one day, but we could really just teach kids that some of the things that they're doing could be a maladaptive coping skill, right? So maladaptive are all about reprieve. It's all about avoidance. It's trying not to feel something that they don't want to feel. Now, remember a couple of slides back, and we were talking about resiliency, and resiliency is also about feeling the icky things that we don't want to feel, the sadness, the frustration, the disappointment, the grief, the fear. So if we are also teaching our children to avoid those feelings, insert maladaptive coping skills, right? Ooh, yep, nope, I don't like to feel that. So I need to do something not to. So yes, we look at risky behaviors, but in addition to that, we also look at people pleasing. We look at anger and rage. We look at dissociation, where they're just kind of, parents will say they're in la la land, they're daydreamers, right? Like, whoa, where'd you go? Emotional addiction. This is a good one where you'll see, and we really need to look at this a lot with our teenagers, where there's an emotional addiction to watching TikTok videos, right? Like, oh, I'm so angry that this is happening in the world, and they become emotionally addicted. They like that high that they get from watching it. You'll see this with friends and family members too, right? Like now, or really anytime throughout the past 2 years, where people wouldn't turn off the TV, right? They would not turn off. They were almost addicted to the feeling it was giving them. Our kids also are modeling that as well. But the kid who is afraid to say no, the kid who's like, oh, it's just easier to tell them I will than to face the discomfort of disappointing, right? That's an avoidance. That is definitely an avoidance that we should dig into a little bit more. And a lot of this, we also are seeing, I truly believe in the schools. So lots of behavioral struggles that are going on, and really being able to assess what those are those linked to? Is this another form of avoidance of discomfort? Are they trying to avoid that? All right. So the conversations that we have with our kids. I will say that some of these heavier conversations that we have with our kids, we really should think about and plan for. There can be a lot of missed opportunities. And as somebody, if anybody knows me in my background, I came to the world of sudden traumatic loss after losing my own father to suicide in 2011. And there is one thing that I have learned, is that sometimes the signs that people give us aren't very clear, and they're very subtle, and we have to listen really closely to hear them. So sometimes the quick brush off or the I'm fine can mean so much more. And, at the beginning of all of everything that's been the past 2 years, I remember standing in the kitchen with my daughter, and she just looked really sad and defeated. And when I asked her how she was or what she was thinking about, she looked at me and she said, Mom, why does it seem like everybody in the world cares about everything but us kids? And I will tell you that as a parent, the first thing you want to do is tell them that's not true, right? Oh my gosh, honey, that's not true. Everybody cares about you. You are loved, right? We want to fix it. And in that moment, I was like, okay, wait a minute, we got to talk. So that's where it kind of that talk to me, right? Let's talk through that. And what is making you feel like nobody in this world cares about you kids anymore. And it ended up being such a great conversation with her, and really an opportunity to find false narratives that she was creating about herself and about how the world was viewing her in that moment. And had I tried to fix it, had I told her that's not true, I also would have never known what narrative she was creating in that little brilliant mind of her in that minute. So that's when I say some of these little tiny moments are so small. So before we have any of conversations, timing in life is everything, but timing for any type of conversation that's related to mental health, or how a child is feeling, or what they're thinking about something. It's all about timing. You do not want to do it when they're crabby or irritable or hungry, or they don't have a lot of time, or they have a lot of homework. timing is truly everything, or they are going to be very dismissive. It doesn't have to be traditional. So I had a young man in my office years ago, and I sat in front of him for, I got to be honest, it had to be like a year trying to like get him to talk to me. And we were talking. And finally, I just went, and this was before when I still could, I could get close to people, but I went and just sat on the couch next to him and completely modeled the same like behavior of just leaning back. And the guy just started talking. I mean, it was just amazing. And so I actually do that with my daughter a lot more. She opens up and talks to me a lot more when the lights are out and I'm just laying next to her, holding her hands, but she doesn't like to talk to me in the very traditional format. And so know that it doesn't have to be very traditional. Mentally prepare yourself for the conversation and what you're planning to talk about. Some of the things that we address as parents, we're scared about, we're nervous about, we're upset about. Any parent in the world will tell you feel like a failure more times than not. And so we have to really assess where we are at prior to talking to them. It's really important that we manage our own emotions in order to assist them. Have a plan of what you want to say and why. I think whys are always the biggest piece, and helps us stay in the emotion of it all. Manage your expectations. That's a big one. And I think you can prepare for it. You know how your kid's going to respond. It's more about what you're going to do with that response. So how do you think they're going to react? And when they do that, or if they do that, how will you handle it? During the conversation, if you take it one thing from this entire presentation, let it be this: validate, 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 validate. I cannot say that word enough. And truly, I think everybody in this world just wants to be validated, right? We just want to know that what we're feeling is okay. And again, we try to talk, we are really good at talking our kids out of it. So that same story that I told about my daughter, I had a very hard time validating that, right? Nobody wants to validate a feeling like she was having, but I didn't want to talk her out of it either. I will say that I think validation is something that has been missing. Really, I say in here during the past 2 years, but I really think it's been missing for a long time, far earlier than this. But the whole piece of validation of being able to say, that sounds like it was really hard. It sounds like that was really difficult for you. Key to getting your child to continue opening up is to validate them. The minute you try to talk them out of it is the minute the conversation ends. That's when they get defensive, right? That's when they start trying to explain to you even more on why they feel the way they do. I see this with couples actually all the time too, which is fascinating. And it's like, just validate it, that the experience was difficult. And really, validation's about acknowledging their feeling, right? You're not saying that what their belief is true. You're validating their feeling as a result of the experience. So the belief around it or the experience itself is not necessarily the validation. It's what they felt during it, right? So my daughter feeling like nobody cared about kids at that moment was the feeling that I validated. I can see why you feel that way. Now tell me why, right? Tell me more. Empathy, empathy, empathy. Great. If you go YouTube, Brene Brown, empathy versus sympathy, one of the best little nuggets, videos that I highly recommend that just talks about the difference of empathy versus sympathy. But empathy is honoring their experience. I'm really sorry you're feeling that way. Thank you for telling me. I'm here, right? It's in a lot of empathy is self-disclosure too. I am like the most transparent person. So most of my examples are usually me. But my daughter came home from school one day and she was kind of stomping around, which usually means she has something to talk about, but she will never tell you that. So finally, in due time, she tells us that she was being disruptive and she has to sit by herself. Her desk is separated from the pod that she was in. And in that moment, I kind of chuckled a little bit and I was like, oh, honey, you come by it naturally. And I told her that when I was in elementary school, that my desk was in the closet. So you could do that back then, right? Like it was literally, it was a big closet, right? A walk-in closet, but my desk was in the closet because that was the only place you could put me where I wouldn't disrupt everybody and talk to everybody. And first off, she couldn't believe that, but she thought it was hilarious. Right. And so it was the ability to normalize her experience by saying it doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It means you're your mother's daughter, truly. And then it was funny because she, was telling other family members, and then my sister and my mother both talked about their experiences being separated too, so that's a connection, right? And community of knowing you're not alone and that somebody else has experienced that. All right. So conversation starters and tips. It's funny because sometimes we overcomplicate things. Shocking. Sometimes just simply asking how they're doing. And, when people come in my office, one of my clients, and I'll always say, how are you doing? And a lot of times they give me the robotic answer that they would give to anybody, right? Oh, I'm good. And then I get to say, no. I really want to know, how are you doing, to slow them down a little bit. Something as simple as that can work with our children too, of letting them know, I'm not just asking you how your day at school was today, sitting down with them and saying, I really want to know how it was. You might be surprised. Sometimes it's not as hard as we think it is. What happens if you get a one-word answer? Which happens a lot, right? We can describe changes we've seen, right? And observed. Begin with one. Don't give them a laundry list of all the things that you've noticed. But one of the things, right? So an example of that is, it seems like you've been spending more time in your room. How are things going with your friends, right? So just an observation. Again, observations are different than criticizing, right? A criticism of, why are you home so much? Or, you're spending a lot of time in your room. That leads to defense. And what we don't want to do is put our kids on the defense. I think a lot of our youth has been on the defense, a lot, right? And we want to take that defense down to let them know, I'm curious, right? So I like to say we need to approach it from a place of curiosity, right? And saying, no, I'm really trying to understand, how come you are spending more time in your room? And I'll tell you, a lot of people like to talk about themselves all the time, right? Oh, somebody's genuinely interested, I want to talk about it, right? But again, it's from a place of curiosity, not approaching it from criticism. Also, not a laundry list, right? Well, you did this, and then you did this and this. And I think we tend to do that, especially when we're nervous. We just flood anybody and everybody. And so that's where, when we're talking about preparing for the conversation, that's another thing that I would say is maybe pull out one observation that you have made, not multiple, in order to prepare for it. Because again, when we get nervous, sometimes it just comes out. Lots of stuff comes out. I think another good one is asking yourself how you would respond. So if your spouse or a friend, parent, whoever came and wanted to talk to you about not hanging out with the family or not talking to people as much, how would you want them to ask you? And how would your question, or how you plan to pose the question, how would you respond to it if asked? So that kind of old way of putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes to say, how would I feel? How would I respond? Couple other tips. Ask open-ended questions, right? Have a list of them. We are really bad at asking open-ended questions. And I see that sometimes with parents where they ask their kids a lot of questions, but man, they give them easy outs, easy ways to not really answer the question. So open-ended questions. Make sure not to minimize anything. This was a big one that I saw a lot kind of happening just in communities everywhere during the past 2 years. And one of the big ways or places I saw that is with sports, right? So many children weren't able to engage in activities that they knew and loved and were really a way of coping with a lot of stress. And I heard that minimized more than probably anything else of, oh, come on, it's not like they're going to go on to, play professionally, or it's not a big deal. And that minimizing their experience. It's minimizing something that they themselves feel is really important. And it doesn't necessarily matter if we think it's important. What matters is that they do. I will say too, use this with your partners, not just your kids. Ask if they want you to they want you to listen or to help find a solution. We like to advise, we like to solve. Majority of the times that we offer solutions, it's because we're uncomfortable, right? Ooh, this is so heavy. This is so uncomfortable. So I'm going to help you fix it so that I'm not uncomfortable. Happens all the time. I don't think people are aware, but it really asking our children, do you want me to just listen as you talk, or would you like me to help find a solution? I see people of everywhere who try to open up and talk about something, and somebody else tries to tell them what they should go do about it to fix it, right? And I would say that 75% of the time, the person just wants somebody to listen. And sometimes I think the best thing I do for people inside my office isn't because I can offer anything else, but just an active ear to listen and to validate that their experience matters. It's okay to take a break. Sometimes kids' stuff comes out that you might not have expected. Stuff that can be heavy, stuff that can be hard to hear. And it's okay to take that break. It's okay to say, thank you for telling me. I just need a second, but I'm coming right back. Right? It is okay. It is better to take that break than to emotionally respond. It's okay to not have all the answers. I hear people stumble on answers all the time when I just want to say, just say you don't know. It's okay. There's so many brilliant people in this world that do know the answer, right? And so it's not about having the answer. It's about teaching them that you'll help them find the answer. Right. And then they get to, not only do we help them find the answer together if they want it, right? But then it also teaches them how to find their own answers, right? Resources and problem solving. So I get asked sometimes, okay, so what if they tell me something and I validate that their experience was difficult, but it really wasn't that difficult, and I don't know that I want them to dwell on it, right? So what do we do with that? I like to play out scenarios all the time. So what is the likelihood this will happen? I kind of really dislike when people say that will never happen, because I work in the world of traumatic and son loss. And let me tell you, it can happen. So what is the likelihood that it will happen? So if a child is afraid when they go to school that the roof is going to cave in, I'm just throwing stuff out there, right? Then, okay, so what is the likelihood? What is the percentage that will actually happen, right? To help them actually look at what the chances of it happening are. Okay. Now, I like to make plans on how we're going to respond if it does. So this whole idea of don't worry about something because it's outside of your control. There's a difference between worrying about something and preparing for something should it happen. I heard an interview with Michael Phelps years ago, and it was really talked exactly to this. And so his coach at the time had him do all kinds of visualizations that were all about winning, right? And everything going as it was supposed to, and it was the best swim, and he was getting the medal. And he said that he didn't like that because he felt like he wouldn't be prepared. So he actually visualized all the things that could go wrong and what he would do if that happened. And it went on that one of the things he happened to visualize was water getting in his goggles. And if anybody remembers, I can't remember which year, the Olympics, where he won, it was either the silver or the bronze, but he ripped off his goggles and he threw them, and he was so mad and nobody knew why he was mad. And he talked about, I was so upset I had water in my goggles, but the only way I ended up medaling is because I prepared for this moment. I knew what I would do if I couldn't see while I was swimming. So having our children make a plan on what they will do or how they will respond also helps them feel more in control. And that what if is now, okay, if it were to happen, here is what my response would be. Here's what I would do. Will this matter in 5 years? Right? That's a good one. I feel like I ask friends that all the time. Are you really going to remember this in 5 years? And a lot of times it's no. I probably will have no memory of it. But sometimes it's yes. Yeah, it will. And that's when we kind of set guidelines and we set limits on it. So I am really good at telling people that I want to sulk for a day and bury myself in a pit of self-pity and feel bad for myself. But then tomorrow I'm going to get up and I'm going to go move forward. But allow me today to just sulk and feel bad for myself, right? Honor those feelings and emotions. So if our kids, it's also saying, hey, you want a day to just be angry? Let's do it. But what are we going to do tomorrow when we wake up? Right? It's not about talking them out of it right now. It's about what are we going to do after? Give them the choice, right? So I often will tell my daughter when she's really upset about something, I'll say, okay, you have two choices. Either one, you can sit and let this impact your entire day, be really angry and upset and ruin your day, or you can decide to take a moment, shake it off, and we'll go do something. But the choice is yours, and I will honor your choice. I've been lucky. She usually chooses to shake it off, right? But it's about giving them the choice, not telling them what to do, but giving them the choice empowers them. Telling them just to shake it off, it's not a big deal, does not empower them. All it does is really just tell them that what they're feeling is silly or ridiculous, or it doesn't matter. Some additional tips here. Anger is such a good one, but I always say anger rarely travels alone. Anger doesn't like to eat lunch alone. Anger is often one of our best defense mechanisms. When somebody is angry and yelling at you, you don't lean in and say, ooh, I'm sorry, tell me more, right? We push away and we say, whoa, okay, calm down. But the problem with anger is that a lot of times there's another emotion behind the anger that doesn't know how to come out. So anger is can be a really, really good predictor of something's going on, but we have to get through that anger. Behind anger, I have found, is usually fear, sadness, guilt, those icky ones, right? That we don't like to let people feel. Intention versus impact. When we talk about validation, this is one of the just biggest keys that I think is it doesn't matter what your intention is. Okay. What matters is the impact that it has. So I hear and see people all the time who will say, hey, you said or did this and it really hurt me. And the person says, oh, that wasn't my intention. Sorry you interpret it like that. That was not my intention. That's not an apology. That's basically tell them that what they're feeling is wrong, right? And so honoring the impact of what we do and how we do it, right? It doesn't matter the intention. It's the impact that it has. And also being able to apologize or just say sorry. We're really bad at saying sorry. Just say sorry is not about saying I'm this awful, terrible person. It's about saying that I understand the impact that had, and I'm sorry. It's all about the repair. That's the beautiful thing about all of it, right? Is that we do have the ability to repair the damage that anybody has experienced, right? It is about repair. It's also not about getting angry at yourself because you yelled at your kid or you didn't say the right thing. That doesn't matter. What happens with what you do after, right? Being able to say, gosh, I'm really sorry I lost my patience or I wasn't listening at that time. I realized you were trying to tell me about something that was really impacting you from school today, and I just brushed it aside. That's the repair. That's what matters. Lastly, trust your gut. Nobody knows your kid better than you do. And your gut always knows if something might be off, and trust it, listen to it, have those conversations. Or if you feel like they're not responding to you, working with somebody or a friend, a family member, somebody, teachers, people at school, people they trust that can have these conversations with kids. It doesn't always have to be just us. Lastly, some of the state mental health resources that we have available.
There's some great ones with that. And real quick reminder, hit the Q&A. As we're approaching the end of time here, but we can hang out a little bit longer. So if you have questions that happen, hit the Q&A and get those out there. The state does offer a lot of great resources when it comes to this, working with the Department of Human Services. My office here can help you out as that well. Lake County's got a great 211 service if you're experiencing that. In the thing that got us to our first conversation, if you look at the back of your high school student's ID, there's actually the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and text number that is on the back of there, so that those kids can reach out if they're in that moment of crisis and don't know quite where to turn. So alerting your students to that's even an option for them right now is great. So there's my info. We'll continue to post this up as well. And there's Jessica's if you want to grab that really quick as well. We will be sharing this on YouTube. We'll have this for later because there was so much good stuff in there that to get it all within this hour period of time frame may be a challenge for everybody. You may want to go back and review it. You may want to share it with another friend in the midst of that. So thank you so much. We're going to get to the questions. Again, hit to the Q&A on there. There was so much good, right? One, acknowledging that our kids have all faced trauma. We've faced trauma. We don't even acknowledge our own trauma in the midst of what we went through this past 2 years. And then just start just start the conversation. It could be something simple. My family, whenever we're together for dinner, we actually do tell me your highs and lows. What's a high and low of your day? And it could be something as simple as the sun was out, or unfortunately, there's too many times where it's the high is we're actually all home together to eat dinner together. Especially when I'm traveling back and forth to Springfield, that's usually the big high, is that we're all home together for dinner. So start those conversations. Speaking of conversations, we've got a question here: advice on how to coach kids to balance being respectful while also appropriately questioning other adults of authority that may not be recognizing their lack of resilience. Well, that's a good one. Or at times not acting in the best interest of the child.
Yeah, it's a really good one, and one that I have seen quite a bit. So one of it's teaching our kids to advocate for oneself too, right? So we can also honor that just because a person is in a position of authority doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do wrong, right? And so that's when being able to teach our children to trust in themselves. I always use the example of when people say, oh, kids just have to do whatever authority members say. And I always said, but what if somebody tells the child, hey, come with me in this room, and the child's body is telling them this doesn't feel good, but then they've been told always to listen and do it as they're told. Well, no, we want to teach them that if it doesn't feel right or something doesn't seem right, then to question it. So when we're talking about being respectful, I think we have gotten a little bit confused with how we can advocate for oneself respectfully, and being able to say what we feel and believe without criticizing somebody else's thoughts and beliefs, right? And so that's all. I think that depending on the child's age too, I think that can be a big factor. But being able, I mean, the older the child, the more they can advocate for themselves and just say, I don't feel that that's right, or I don't feel comfortable with that. My son doesn't like to use so much hand sanitizer because we like soap. And so he'll just be like, no, thank you. And what's so cute is most adults kind of look back at him like, oh, okay. Like they're just not used to it, And so it's able to teach them that they can speak up for themselves. They can say, this doesn't feel right, or I don't necessarily agree, while still respecting somebody else's. I will say, if that it is a younger child, that getting people involved or speaking with authority members directly or people above them, I highly recommend. I think one thing that we need to really be aware of is that not only are our kids experiencing trauma, like you just said, we all are, right? So our teachers, our coaches, parents, everybody is experiencing a level of stress. So to me, sometimes people in authority who maybe aren't responding in the best manner, that could actually be another sign that maybe they themselves are wanting or needing somebody to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. And continuing those empowering conversations with our kids, and, even going deeper into that. Well, why did you feel this way? What made you feel this way? What could you have done? What should you have done? I think so many times, unfortunately, in especially our suburban rushed area, we want to move on to the next thing.
Oh yeah.
We're done. We're over. We want to move on to the next thing. And we forget that something valid happened in that moment in our child's life, no matter if they're 5, 15, or 25. And the reason they brought it up is because they want to have a conversation, or they want you to be aware of it and engage in it. So this was fantastic. I hope everyone there enjoyed it and learned a lot. Somebody asked, will this be available? Yeah, we're gonna post this up. You can go to repbossbos.com. We'll also throw it up on our socials when it is available. We'll download it, clean it up a little bit here and there, and we'll make sure it's available so that you can go back and review yourself. I think I'll be watching this quite a few times, and you can share it with other parents as well. It's just a great reminder that again, our kids went through something. We went through something. And if we don't acknowledge it and start having the conversations, it's only going to hurt us in the long run.
Yes.
So let's continue these conversations, especially as parents. Let's take charge and have these conversations with our kids. So Jessica, real quick, how can they get a hold of you? Where can they find out more? I know it was brought up there on the slide real quick, but I can't go back. Website.
Can't go back.
I can, but let me see me all clickety. Website.
No, online. I mean, definitely online. My website, JL Hutchison. I also, which I never even talked about, founder of myredsaid.com. You can definitely contact me through there as well. Yeah,
we're going to talk about My Red Said coming up.
Yeah, about that.
in the couple months to come. We're going to talk about that. It's a fantastic initiative that Jessica's done, and we're excited to partner and work with you on that as well. So thank you guys all for tuning in tonight. Hope you guys enjoyed it and got as much out of it as I did, and we'll talk to you guys again soon.
Thank you.